The sharp decrease in atmospheric pressure on Earth, its fall to a critically low level, that is, to the current one, put an end to the existence of all giant animals on our planet. Not only the huge dinosaurs disappeared, but also all those whose body parameters did not fit into the new framework. These were giant or oil, and huge indirect bacteria, and wolves weighing a ton, and of course, giant people. In any case, they could no longer exist on the surface, and that means the Earth made room for a new dominant creature, the common man. That is, you and me? Yes, I know that in reality our self-designation is slightly different. We call ourselves Homo sapiens, that is, a reasonable man. But you understand that calling us reasonable is a very big exaggeration. Smart, yes, cunning, yes, but definitely not reasonable. We are too easily influenced by emotions, feelings, the influence of psychotropic substances and programming techniques. After all, banal anger, fury, greed, pride, any of these emotions are constantly present in any person and very easily kick the mind, and even conscience somewhere in the far corner. So we cannot be called reasonable. And after the atmospheric pressure dropped, the gods, that is, representatives of other civilizations, remained somewhere deep underground, and their guardians, titans, golems, giants and other governing creatures partially perished, and partially also hid in shelters. We were left alone. You're on the Mysteries of History channel. Any coincidence of the story with real events is either logical or accidental. Guardians. So, left alone on the surface of the planet, people without proper management degraded. There are many examples of this. Polynesia, Australia, New Zealand, Africa, South and North America, the Far East. All people responded, the entire planet turned into one continuous wild world. No, not all of the Mediterranean, the Middle East and Europe showed signs of civilization. This is a small piece of the total area of the planet, no more than 12–15% of the total land. But in this area, civilization did not perish, but tried to recover. How does it differ from the rest of the Earth? The mild climate of Europe. But in the area of the central Russian plain or in the same territory of the modern USA, it is no worse. The Mediterranean Sea allowed trade to develop. But what about the Caribbean Sea, the Sea of Japan, the East China Sea, all of Indonesia? The conditions for trade there are no worse, and the climate is pleasant. Maybe then you will say that Europe and the Mediterranean have the largest deposits of iron and copper ore? Again, no. The largest open iron deposits on the planet are in Bolivia, and there are some on Hindustan, the same as in northeastern China. And the largest, again, open copper deposit, also not in Europe, but in Chile, that is, in South America. In other words, the beginning of civilization was not the presence of some resources. Then what? It is believed that the first civilization arose in the Middle Eastern interfluve of the Sumer-Akkad kingdom. That is, the ancient Sumerians. They spoke mainly the Akkad language, about which we know almost nothing. Here is an explanation that seems to explain everything, and at the same time it explains nothing. The strangest thing is that the self-name of this people is completely different, but for some reason historians decided to give it. Well, it is believed that the Sumerian language is one of the most ancient Semitic languages, which means that some similar words and meanings should be in the modern language. Well, at least echoes. About the same way that any Russian can relatively freely read Bulgarian or Polish, Ukrainian texts. Many words, even when pronounced differently, are still written the same way, and are also pronounced the same way. Only the stress is placed in a different place. There are currently only 6 active Semitic languages. These are Amharic, Assyrian, Aramaic, Maltese, Hebrew, and the most numerous Arabic. Therefore, it is quite easy to check. Only Hebrew has a similar word. By sound, this word is Sumer. That is, a keeper, a guard, a watchman. It turns out to be an interesting thing. the first civilization on Earth. Officially considered the keepers, that is, the Sumerians are the keepers. From whom? Obviously the keepers of some knowledge, and at the same time the guards of some territory. And it is from the Sumerians that we first learn about the pantheon of gods. Their number is simply enormous. Enki, Ishtar, Tiamat, Antu, Gilgamesh, Baal, Enlil, and so on and so forth. There are about 700 deities in total. Each has its own history. Each has its own parents and children. Later, these gods moved to other Greek, Roman, and Egyptian pantheons. For example, Apollo, Artemis, Athena, Hunting, Mazda, Bes, Hercules, and of course Yahweh, and many, many others. All of them migrated to later civilizations from the Sumerian list of gods. It is also puzzling that the Sumerian civilization began somehow immediately, suddenly, right from scratch, and immediately with knowledge of city building, metal and stone processing, with knowledge of the basics of agricultural delegation, with writing and a ready-made mythology, and just as suddenly disappeared, more than 4,000 years ago. However, the oddities do not end there. The Greek and then Roman civilizations also seem to appear out of nowhere. However, if you look more closely, you can notice a couple of nuances. For example, the Greek one. According to mythology, the goddess Rhea hid in Crete from her husband Kronos in a cave, where she gave birth to the future supreme god Zeus. Here, in fact, it is directly stated that the gods of that time, the first gods, were hiding deep underground from someone or something. And considering that they were hiding from Kronos, that is, the god of time, then it turns out that we are directly told that the gods were waiting out the time in underground shelters, Kronos. How is this not anabiosis? That is, on the island of Crete, perhaps, there is one of the entrances to the ancient shelter of the gods. Well, okay. What about the Egyptian civilization? On the one hand, we don't seem to have any direct references to any connection with catacombs. However, here too, the story begins with a sudden jerk. That is, according to the official version, some scattered tribes exist around the Nile for a long time. Then, gradually, they create upper and lower kingdoms with vague methods of government, when suddenly, around the 3rd millennium BC, about 5,000 years ago, a certain character named Minos appears, who takes control of everyone, introduces mandatory worship of the gods, introduces the practice of sacrifices, and also gives the unfortunate wild farmers writing, for which he proclaims himself the first pharaoh of Egypt and builds the city of Memphis, and then rests on his laurels for another 63 years, until he died while hunting from an accidental hippopotamus bite. It happens. And mind you, he united both kingdoms practically without a fight. In any case, none of the historians mention a single battle with him. This means that his authority was already indisputable then. And knowing that he died in the 63rd year of his reign, it turns out that he accomplished his feats at about 18-19 years old. And that's a stretch. Can you imagine an 18-year-old man with outstanding skills as a commander, a hunter, a writer, literate, with full knowledge of the gods and their pantheon, and even capable of building cities? Yes, in principle, any modern teenager can do this if he has had all this knowledge hammered into him at school for 10 years. But if it was he who brought writing to the Egyptians, then who gave him the knowledge? And here we suddenly remember where he came from. From the small town of Cherni, in the very south of Egypt. The town itself has long since disappeared, and there are disputes about its location. However, it is known for sure that it was somewhere near Obidos. So close that by modern standards it is practically one city or suburb. Obidos. But in Obidos, everything is much more interesting. After all, according to legends, it was here that the head of the deceased Osiris was buried, and then miraculously revived here. According to the same legends, the path to the kingdom of the dead begins. It was here that mysterious hieroglyphs were found depicting an alleged helicopter, a tank, and a UFO. And in general, According to information from the Turin Papyrus, Mendes was not the first, and before him there were more ancient dynasties ruling for 1,000 years and possessing divine origin. Well, now the puzzle is complete. There are similar motives here again. The gods went into the afterlife somewhere deep, but left a passage for the chosen ones. Well, or so that they could get out themselves. Apparently one of these chosen ones was Minos, who later united Egypt. It is clear that this is not the end of the information about Egypt, and we will talk about Egypt again at the end of the film. In the meantime, let's look at another civilization, the Roman one. Although the Roman civilization exerted a huge and even decisive influence on the entire subsequent history of its foundation, at first glance it seems to have no connection with the gods hiding somewhere underground. It simply absorbed all the previous civilizations it had conquered, including the Greek, Egyptian, Celtic, and Persian, and indirectly the Sumerian one, a pantheon that has mutated many times over. That's on the one hand. But on the other, as usual, it's not that simple. How did a bunch of soldiers manage to defeat civilizations supported, albeit indirectly, by ancient gods? Legends about the emergence of the Roman Empire differ. In one legend, these are the descendants of Aeneas, who escaped from Troy, who, by the way, was the son of the goddess Venus, or Aphrodite, from a mortal man. Moreover, what is characteristic during the Trojan War, in which the gods directly participated in the battles on an equal basis with people, Aeneas was saved twice, once by a couple of gods Aphrodite, that is, his mother and Apollo, and the second time he was saved directly from Achilles by Poseidon himself. Why would the gods of the highest rank suddenly save some mortal, even the son of Venus? After all, Venus herself understood from the very beginning that becoming pregnant from a mortal is a terrible act for a goddess. That's why she gave him the name Aeneas, which means terrible. Nevertheless, the gods took great care of his health. We are currently interested in the fact that the founder of the Roman Empire was the son of a goddess. There is another legend about the founding of Rome. This is the story of Romulus and Remus, two brothers raised by a she-wolf on the Capitoline Hills, which everyone knows from school. And although it seems completely different, it is not. According to it, Aeneas founded not Rome, but the city of Alba Longa in the province of Lazio. After about 500 years of ruling the city and the province, his descendants, the brothers Nometor and Amulius, had a falling out over the throne, resulting in Nometor's sons being killed and his daughter Rhea being made a Vestal. However, god Mars came to her, God again, and Rhea bore him two sons, Romulus and Remus. And Amulius, learning of this, cut off her head in anger and threw her brothers into the river, and from there they were saved by that same she-wolf. By the way, when they grew up and restored power in Alba Longa, they decided to build a city in honor of this event in the place from where the she-wolf pulled them out. But they did not agree on some details, and Romulus killed Remus and then founded the city of Rome. That's the story. On the one hand, in any case, Rome was founded by the descendants of the gods, even twice the descendants, either just a son of Venus or a son of Mars, a great-grandson of Venus. On the other hand, something went wrong with their brotherly love. Fratricide flourished like nowhere else. Apparently, some kind of birth defect. Nevertheless, this whole family was in the plans of the gods as much as 500 years before the founding of Rome, even before the Trojan War with the conception of Aeneas. The story is certainly interesting, but where are the secret catacombs of the gods? Yes, they are right there in plain sight, and no one is hiding them. The Roman catacombs are entire labyrinths of underground rooms and passages, the total length of which is currently more than 150 kilometers. What is characteristic is that it is believed that early Christians hid in them, who allegedly arranged mass burials there. At the moment, more than 750,000 burials are known in these catacombs. Where they end and where they lead has not yet been fully explored. It is interesting that a very significant part of these catacombs is located in the Vatican, and, apparently, at least partially transferred to the Apostolic Archive, the very same Vatican archive of all knowledge of the planet. Of course, mere mortals will not be able to get there, but the Vatican itself says on its website that the total length of all the bookshelves in it exceeds 75 kilometers. And this means that, since the Vatican itself occupies a total area of less than half a square kilometer, then either these corridors lead somewhere very far or very deep. In principle, both options are possible at once. In any case, this is only about the library. But besides it, under the Vatican, there are also classic catacombs, where hundreds of corpses are fixed as mummies. Popes and simply influential people are buried there. The only thing that is not there is a connection with the old gods. Since the Roman Empire is the youngest of all, it has a connection only with the modern Abrahamic gods, and, in particular, with Jesus Christ, and the Old Testament Yahweh. All Abrahamic religions, from Judaism to Islam, claim that God is one and singular. Sometimes it is true, he is triune, but still he is one. It was with the permission and direction of the Roman popes that the Inquisition raged. People were burned for another faith, as, by the way, some fanatics still do. Witchcraft and various versions of clairvoyant predictions are considered especially punishable among Christians, both then and now. After all, one of the main postulates of the Abrahamic religions is that God's plan is fundamentally unknown to anyone, and clairvoyance is exclusively an obsession and temptation sent by the devil. And therefore, it would be very strange to find traces of worship of ancient pagan gods in this heart of the Christian world, in the Vatican, right? And most ordinary people think so. Here let's digress a little from the main line of the story and ask ourselves a question. Has anyone ever thought about what the word Vatican actually means, and how it came about? Many people now remember the popular version from a few years ago, and quite an interesting one, that the word Vatican should be read as Batu Khan, that is, Khan Batu and his Khanate. An interesting version, which has many supporters. But the Vatican as a state appeared in the 20th century, which is much later than the invasion of Khan Batu. So, most likely this is a hypothesis that is out of place. But in fact, the official version is even more interesting. And for this, you don't need to delve into conspiracy theories. It's enough to look at the official one. So, the word Vatican was first used in the so-called Lateran Agreements of 1929, when it was necessary to come up with a name for a dwarf state inside Rome. And then they decided to use the name of the area, that is, the hill on which it was located, Monte Vaticano, a mountain or hill, Vatican. That is, before that, the hill seemed to have no relation to Christianity. But this is not the answer we need. Let it be just a hill. But what does the name of the hill mean then? It turns out that supposedly back in the time of the Etruscans, there stood a temple dedicated to one specially and deliberately forgotten Roman god, who bore the name Vatican and could predict the future, had the gift of clairvoyance and prediction of the priests of this god, and were called Vados. This is already more interesting. But let's go even further. We know that the entire Roman pantheon of gods was borrowed from other civilizations, but the lion's share, the overwhelming majority, of course, from the Greeks. And almost every Roman god has its predecessor, an analog among the Greeks. For example, the Greek Ares, Ars, is the Roman Mars, the Greek Zeus is the Roman Jupiter, the Greek Hermes is the Roman Mercury, and so on. And this means that the Greeks must definitely have an analog of this strange, forgotten, literally erased from history Roman god, the Vatican. And he really is. This is Zeus's cousin Prometheus. He was the one who had the ability to see things clairvoyantly, as his name directly suggests. Pro, that is, ahead or forward, and Metheus, that is, thinking, that is, thinking forward. By the way, it was for this, and not for the fact that Zeus brought fire to people and chained him to a rock. According to legend, Prometheus knew who would rebel against Zeus and kill him. This is the information Zeus wanted to get out of him, torturing him, including chaining him to a rock. Incidentally, in the end, Hephaestus freed Prometheus and persuaded Zeus to make peace with him. Prometheus gave up the conspirators, and they lived happily ever after, but not for long, if anyone didn't know. Although one does not exclude the other, and it is quite possible that both events took place. And Prometheus really did, among other things, give people knowledge. So, what happens? The Vatican literally worships the ancient antique god of the Titans Prometheus in its name, and this god also literally gave people knowledge, and the Vatican itself stands on his temple, and in fact bears his name, although officially it seems to persecute the whole world for clairvoyance. That is, it turns out that the entire Catholic world with the Roman popes at the head worships not Christ, not Yahweh, but Prometheus. Although, wait, both Prometheus and Jesus knew what would happen next. That is, they were clairvoyants or prophets. Both brought new knowledge to people, were teachers of both Prometheus and Jesus, chained the crucified one to a rock, the other to a cross, and Prometheus and Christ, while crucified, were tormented with sharp piercing objects. An eagle laid out the liver of one, the legionary Longinus stabbed the other in the hypochondrium with a spear, and both, despite this, were saved. One was forgiven and forged, and the other simply resurrected. There can be no such coincidences. Although if the authors of the New Testament were simply making it up, then why not take a plot from Greek mythology as a basis? Such phenomena are still commonplace. But be that as it may, here too, the key moments of the dungeon are present. The ancient god who gave people knowledge, and his companions apparently, and those who came out from there after the catastrophe. And in especially privileged cases, they are buried there to this day. Most likely bunkers survived on other continents, but there, apparently, there were big problems with getting to the surface. So big that it took a long time, perhaps 10 years, to cut a way back up. Meanwhile, the Sumerian pantheon of gods continued to explore the planet and analyze the destruction and losses. Apparently, contact with most of the civilization's core enclaves had been lost. But at first, this hardly bothered them. After all, the more important task was to rebuild the human population and revive civilization. Around this time, something happened that we may never know about. But for some reason, a war broke out between the gods. In the Greek version, it was a war between the Olympians and the Titans, as a result of which the Olympians won, and the Titans were thrown into Tartarus. However, this is deceitful. The thing is that in fact they were all Titans, and God is just a position occupied by a specific Titan, in our case Zeus, and the Olympians, accordingly, are the organization of the government and the hierarchy. Something like our modern power structures, for example, the FBI. Yes, all Greek gods without exception are simply Titans, starting with their father and mother Zeus, Kronos and Rhea, who were Titans. And their parents Uranus and Gaia were also Titans. That is, all Greek gods without exception are simply Titans. And the word God itself in this context is simply a status, a position. And it does not always go to the best. For example, the same Zeus was deprived of the gift of clairvoyance, unlike his cousin Prometheus, who was initially, by the way, on the side of the Titans. But then, again thanks to his gift, he saw who would win, and went over to the side of the Olympians. What did the Titans disagree about? Contrary to popular belief that Zeus simply wanted to take revenge on his father Kronos, there is an alternative version. According to the evidence of unknown ancient authors, the reason for this war is that after Hera saw that Epos, born of a concubine, ruled such a large kingdom of Egypt, she wanted him killed during a hunt. And she also called on the Titans to drive Zeus out of the kingdom and return the throne to Kronos. When the Titans tried to establish the sky, Zeus, with the help of Athena, Apollo and Artemis, threw them straight into Tartarus. And on the last Titan, who was their leader Atlas, he laid the vault of heaven. Even now he is ordered to support the sky on his shoulders. That's it. Apparently Atlas holds the sky and cannot move to repair it, for if he moves, the sky will fall. And Epaphus, because of whom it all began. This, apparently, is the same man with divine kinship who ruled Egypt long before Menus. So, let's summarize. The first war of the gods. In fact, it was the war of the Titans. Second, the Egyptian enclave had apparently suffered greatly, and its leadership had been entrusted to a half-Titan, half-human. Apparently, his power extended not only to humans, but also to the Titans of the Egyptian enclave. Therefore, the dissatisfied giants decided to overthrow his power, and at the same time, the power of Zeus. Third, but Zeus outwitted them. He attacked the Titans during the repair work called the establishment of the sky. And they left alive only the Titan Atlas, on whom the entire burden of this work was dumped. On him alone. An interesting nuance. The Titans were installing the sky. How should this be understood? Did the sky not exist before, or did someone destroy it? Perhaps in this case the sky does not refer to the Earth's atmosphere, but to a dome in an underground bunker that was half destroyed after another strike. A shelter. It is not for nothing that the sculptures of Titans in architecture usually support the ceiling, not the sky. Which, in fact, is hinted at by the very fact that the Titans from one shelter decided to seize power in the second shelter. And all this before the official history of people says a lot. Something completely wrong began to happen in the plan of salvation. I suspect that the trouble, as usual, was complex. That is, it was a consequence of the coincidence of several reasons. Firstly, it was the drop in atmospheric density. Secondly, most likely, the loss of the ability to personally control people. It was necessary to do something urgently, to create some substitutes. And thirdly, the loss of connection with their creators, gods or God, or one of the possible scenarios involved taking power into one's own hands and developing a new scenario. Perhaps the formation of a planet to please one species of one civilization. And for this, it was necessary to at least destroy all the others, or completely block their access to the surface. And all this must be done in a fairly short period of time, since people in their majority do not yet possess knowledge, and in terms of their level of development are not much different from tame domestic animals. And the Titans are rapidly dying out and becoming dull from lack of oxygen. It is impossible to evolve and adapt quickly. Where are the bones of the Titans? By the way, about bones and evolution. One of the mysteries of paleontology is why some representatives of the animal world developed bipedality, or, more simply, bipedality. The fact is that this is absolutely unnatural in our modern conditions, and although it is officially believed that this method of movement provides greater speed, in fact, everyone understands perfectly well that this is not so. Another more adequate theory says that, most likely, this is connected with a mixed environment of existence. Animals spent part of their time on land and part in water, which is as much as 800 times denser than air. And therefore, it is more convenient to stand on 2 legs than on 4. Although here we understand that in reality, things are not at all like that, and we have a huge number of animals leading a semi-aquatic lifestyle. But none of them stood on 2 legs, except perhaps man, and the penguin. Nature believes that with such a lifestyle, it is much more important to develop webbing between the fingers for greater speed in the water than to stand on 2 legs. However, there is one grain of truth in this theory. The density of the habitat plays a big role, so the mass standing on 2 legs of living creatures at the beginning of the Mesozoic era must have had a connection with this. Look, if the density of the atmosphere is much higher than it is today, for example, 10-20 atmospheres or more, then it begins to have a stronger effect on the way of moving. Swimming. Flying in it, like in water, is still impossible, but pushing off from it is much more convenient and effective. You will not fall as quickly as now if you lose your balance, and therefore, shifting the center of gravity forward and quickly rearranging two legs becomes a less energy-consuming and faster way of moving than on four legs. In addition, you can increase your weight many times over by reducing the load on your limbs. However, if your body became even larger, you had to stand on all fours again, because you can't argue with physics. So, after the catastrophe, when the density of the Earth's atmosphere dropped to its current level, physics intervened again. All large bipedal dinosaurs died out, just like all the others whose mass did not allow them to withstand the increased load on their limbs. For many, the maximum weight was something around 5 tons. It is believed that at the moment the largest land animal is the savanna elephant with a weight of 10-12 tons. But this is an exaggeration, since they reach such a weight very, very rarely, and the average weight is exactly those same 4-5 tons. And at the same time, the life of these elephants cannot be called easy. So, if you are a person 4-5 meters tall or taller, then when the pressure drops, the resulting increased weight will begin to press on you much more strongly. The load on the spine will increase sharply, and for this, you will have to increase muscle mass. At the same time, the overall weight will increase even more, and you will need even more muscles. And sooner or later, this race will end with you either switching to a completely aquatic lifestyle, or, most likely, bending forward a lot, and leaning on your hands. It would be good if you grew longer arms and shortened your legs so that you had to bend less. This is how we get the gorilla. You don't think that its hands and fingers developed as a result of leaning on the ground while moving around on the ground? Of course not. At the beginning of its evolution, the gorilla walked on 2 legs, or most likely, jumped on trees. It still does so. And although walking on 2 legs is not a big problem for a gorilla or other apes, they still prefer to move, leaning on their front paws. Whatever scientists say about high speed on 2 legs. Although no, the gorilla is a much later adaptation. But there were also larger variants. These are the Gigantopithecus. They were 3 meters tall or more, and outwardly they resembled a modern gorilla. Although this is what they tell us, since by a completely incomprehensible and mysterious coincidence, only its jaws have fallen into the hands of researchers over the past 90 years, and even then in a very incomplete state. Well, and another find. Possibly a humerus. Possibly. Accordingly, we see a picture created by the imagination of paleontologists, based on the analysis of these very jaws. Once again, these teeth were first found in Hong Kong, in a Chinese store selling folk medicine. There, the teeth of these giants were sold as dragons and teeth. In other words, in China, trade in their remains was put on stream. But at the same time, not even fragments of a skull, much less skeletons, have been found. For 90 years, seriously? In other words, if we are looking for the remains of ancient titans, then most likely they will be passed off as Gigantopithecus. Well, or iguanodons. If we are looking for representatives of another civilization and another race. The facts that in ancient times some highly developed civilization left traces on our planet are obvious. They exist, and highly developed civilizations in technical terms, possessing developed machine production. There are so many of these traces, we have found them, 1,000 signs of high technology, that, in my opinion, the question of whether or not there was some highly developed civilization here in ancient times, I believe, has already been closed. There are traces. This is 100% proof. The second 100% proof removes the most basic, the deepest contradiction. The approach that we have now is now hidden in our attitude, in the academic attitude. The attitude of academic science to ancient legends and traditions. We see that this was done by some highly developed civilization. The capabilities of this civilization far exceeded the capabilities of our ancestors. And the facts are there. This means that there were some representatives. It doesn't matter what kind. but those whom our ancestors called gods. Yahweh versus Baal. Chronicle of the Revolution. Analyzing Old Testament sources and reconstructing the events. From the beginning of Abrahamic history to the Exodus, the conclusions are as follows. If we discard all the unnecessary chaff, then we see how one specific creature, carefully hiding his name, hiding behind fog, cloud, and other visual effects, searches for artifacts scattered across the earth. Some of them are passed on to their prophets, such as the staff of Moses. To facilitate the search and recruitment of new adepts are needed to conquer some objects that may have been guarded. The people themselves were chosen almost at random. He, this God, did not care at all who would carry out his will. But at that time, most peoples faithfully served their gods. Therefore, it was necessary to choose those who did not suffer from honesty. Moreover, in the text of the Old Testament itself, it is mentioned more than once that Yahweh himself was often furious with the ability of this people to quickly betray. At least twice he was close to completely destroying all his followers and starting all over again with other peoples. The first time was when during their stay on Sinai, they created a golden calf for themselves. Then everything ended in a massacre. The second time, when the spies returned from the Promised Land and reported on the strength and numerical superiority of the armies of the peoples that lived there, the Jews rebelled and refused to go to war. And then the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud in the middle of the tabernacle from the meeting of all the sons of Israel. And the Lord said to Moses, "How long will this people provoke me, and how long will they not believe me? For all the signs that I have done among them, I will plague them with plagues and destroy them, and they will produce from themselves and your father's house people more numerous and stronger than he." Chapter 14. This happened in the second year of the Exodus from Egypt. However, Moses somehow managed to dissuade Yahweh from completely destroying the people, and the punishment was replaced by that famous 40 years of wandering in the desert until all who rebelled died themselves, a natural death. Thus, this God did not care at all what kind of people would be under his control. The main thing is that they do what he needs, and he needed the following. First, to get possession of the cave of Machpelah, where Adam and Eve were supposedly buried, and some artifacts of other gods. Perhaps there is another entrance to the underground bunker there. Second, he needed to get to Jericho and take some other artifacts that are not mentioned anywhere in the Bible. However, it is said that the battle for Jericho was the first and last time that Archangel Michael personally participated. Apparently, he was monitoring the careful execution of the order not to take any trophies for himself after the victory. None at all. That is, everything that remained after the victory was carefully inspected almost personally by Archangel Michael. Something very important was there. And after the victory over Jericho, Yahweh and the Archangel never appeared live before people again. Well, how do we not know? Of course, many works have been written, but we do not know the exact pronunciation of certain words. All statements about how a certain word sounded begin with the word we assume or we think. That is, it is inaccurate. Where did this name Sumer come from, and what does it mean? It is all quite simple. This name was given by researchers in the 19th century decoding, and it supposedly means people of the Sumer region, people of Sumer. That is, they most likely achieved their goal. And what was it then? This goal. Perhaps the goal was precisely a palace coup among the gods. And this is not without meaning, considering that, having lost contact with their creators, and having lost the opportunity to live freely on the surface, the Titans began to invent ways to continue to rule remotely. Well, this is shown by the episode with Aeneas. Venus, aka Aphrodite, gave birth to him from a relationship with a common man, seemingly by accident. However, during the Battle of Troy, he was the only one saved by the gods. The first time he was saved by Aphrodite herself with Apollo, and the second time he was saved by Poseidon, who was fighting on the opposite side, That is, he took him from his own warrior Achilles and saved him. And after the miraculous rescue of Aeneas, the gods continued to look after his family. Mars himself added additional divine blood to him by conceiving children. His great-great-great-granddaughters, who later founded Rome. That is, it is obvious that the gods had plans to create ruling dynasties of people. Actually, Yahweh himself could not stay on the surface for long either. And if he wanted to rule something on earth, he also needed a ruling dynasty of people. Obviously, for his appearance to Moses, he got or created some mechanism somewhere in which he himself moved, or his hologram, with the help of which he communicated with Moses. Archangel Michael, who was present at the Battle of Jericho, and other angels who were constantly with them, were most likely robots with a limited service life and functionality. So what were they looking for on the surface? How could some artifacts help them? Let's try to go a little further. First, let's pay attention to the tabernacle, which was constantly with the Jewish people during their wanderings in the desert. It continuously contained the Ark of the Covenant and a couple of angels who constantly adjusted and regulated something there for 40 years. Say what you want, but I will never believe that the gods were not able to tune their own mechanism, especially for such a long time. Especially since the camp was constantly moving from place to place, and at each new place a new tuning took place. Many researchers have also noticed the similarity of the tabernacle model with the antenna inside which the Ark of the Covenant transmitter was located, with the help of which Moses repeatedly communicated remotely with Yahweh. That is, the tabernacle was clearly some kind of signal amplifier for the Ark. But Moses' connection with God did not occur through it very often. And yet, the tabernacle always worked. This means that its main purpose is something else. And perhaps this is where the answer lies. Look, the tabernacle was a broadband antenna amplifying the signal, and the ark, accordingly, was some kind of radio receiver. This means that the angels in the tabernacle were not just fiddling with the settings. They were looking for a specific signal in a certain range. Having found the signal and, let's say, determined its intensity, the camp would move to another location, and the operation would be repeated, then move to a third. And the operation would be repeated again. I think the military or the radio amateur have already guessed what I'm getting at. The only thing it looks like is a bearing, searching for the source of the signal using triangulation. At a minimum, 3 points are needed for this, but the more, the better. And judging by the fact that the measurements took 40 years, the point itself has not moved anywhere. However, the signal was very weak. If it were in space or on the surface of the Earth, such a search operation would have taken a couple of hours. Well, weeks at the most. But, apparently, the signal was very weak, which is why it took so much time and effort. Nevertheless, the source of the signal was found. Then Jericho was taken, and Yahweh and the angels disappeared. Or rather, disappeared from the field of view of God's chosen people, but not from history. Many historians note that the Old Testament, and indeed the Bible in general, never mention the Egyptian pyramids. Historians mumble something unintelligible on this topic, trying to justify it by saying, for example, that the references to them were lost. But this is not so. There are no pyramids on very recent maps. For example, Mercator's maps of the 16th, 17th centuries. They are also not there. The idol of the Golden Woman, located somewhere far away in the supposedly wild Siberia. Yes, but there are no pyramids. In addition, as we know, all ancient and antique buildings without exception are designed for a person 3 meters tall and above. That is, titans and giants. However, for example, the sarcophagus in the king's chamber in the great Egyptian pyramid of Cheops is designed for a person slightly less than 2 meters tall. That is, in other words, the pyramids appeared quite recently, when titans and gods no longer existed, and they served modern people, not gods. but they were clearly not created by people or by people who possessed the technologies and knowledge of the gods. And they clearly have some purpose. One of the first to notice that the pyramids have a very strong resemblance to horn antennas was back in 2012. The late Professor Sergei Saparov. He noticed that the pyramids worked perfectly as a detector of some kind of signal. In 2010, measurements were made in which he had the chance to take part, and it turned out that the pyramid works perfectly as a detector. There is some kind of static noise underground, and the pyramid selects and amplifies several frequencies. Moreover, this amplification is dozens of times. This means that the pyramid is a megaphone that captures certain frequencies of seismic noise. Now, in addition to the fact that we have seismic elastic waves, in this pyramid there are granite details, and in different pyramids their quantity is different. Sometimes it is a complete facing, sometimes it is a strip along the bottom, sometimes it is in some inclusions. There are granite parts inside in the finishing of the chambers, in the finishing of the passages. In short, there are the building material is a piezo substance, a substance that has a piezo effect. This means that the wall that can exist there causes electrical phenomena. There is voltage at the ends of such a thing. This means that the electrical signal is converted into an electromagnetic one. This is also a fact. The only question is whether it can be used, and for what. Well, this can also be fantasized about. This is how a standard horn, antenna, horn, which are used in radio engineering, is designed. It turns out that some noises really do occur under the pyramids, and the structure of the pyramids is such that with the help of waveguides, which are the passages inside them, all unnecessary noises are filtered out. One specific signal is isolated, then amplified in the resonator gallery, and apparently fed into the sarcophagus, where a communication session takes place not with Yahweh, but with the surviving titans in the underground enclave of Egypt. That is, in order to build such a pyramid, an antenna, you need to know not only the characteristics of the signal, but also preferably place it exactly above it, and then focus on it. Since it is not easy to make the stone walls of the pyramid change their angle, this is what required careful direction finding of the signal. Over many years, in order to then immediately build a pyramid with the right angles in the right place, exactly above the bunker. That is, the pyramids were created as a means of communication with the deep enclave of either titans or even more powerful creators. This explains literally everything. First, it explains what exactly it was trying to triangulate. The tabernacle of Yahweh in the Arabian desert. It was trying to triangulate not just a point on the map where the signal was coming from. It was trying to triangulate at what depth it was located. And this is possible due to the curvature of the Earth's surface hundreds of kilometers from Egypt. In other words, after the Jews conquered Jericho for Yahweh, he went to build the pyramids. But most likely he chose another people for this purpose, because the Jews had let him down too often and too badly. They were impossible to rely on. And I can say with confidence that the pyramids were built by one of the European civilizations that were more reliable for such work than those whom Moses brought out. Although the Opus Titanomachy has long been lost. There are records of it in other ancient Greek authors, and they contain rather contradictory information. In particular, it turns out that for some time, the Titans under the command of Kronos and the Olympians led by Zeus coexisted. But the number of those dissatisfied with Zeus grew, and Hera, rejected by Zeus, provoked a war. It is unclear who started it first, but the Olympians began the war by destroying the Titans of Egypt, who were installing the sky, that is, simply repairing the underground dome. It could have collapsed in places, blocking the exit to the surface, walling up everyone else inside. However, they did not die, and, judging by the signals, they are still doing some work. Prometheus was initially on their side, but, apparently, having learned with the help of his gift that there would be no victory, he went over to the camp of Zeus. However, he never received gratitude, being chained to the rock. And although in the end he still told Zeus that his son from his marriage with Thetis would kill him, I think Prometheus was lying. In fact, it was he who eventually led the war against Zeus, which, by the way, continues to this day. Well, let's compare what we know about Prometheus and Yahweh. Prometheus is Zeus's cousin. Shalamoth, perhaps he is Yahweh, the brother of the god Baal, the Greek Zeus, and the Sumerian Baal. They are one and the same god. Prometheus convinced Zeus to accept only the bones and fat of sacrificial animals as sacrifices, and to give the meat to people. During their wanderings in the desert, Yahweh repeatedly told Moses and Sharon about the importance of burning fat, and that meat was to be eaten by people. Prometheus had the gift of clairvoyance and prophecy, which even Zeus did not have. Yahweh vehemently denies that anyone else has such a gift. Prometheus created people from clay and water. Yahweh also created people from clay. The main center of Catholic Christianity is named after the Roman analog of Prometheus, the Vatican, and stands on a hill dedicated to Prometheus, inside which are catacombs leading to an unknown depth, some of which are filled with manuscripts and books containing the entire history of the world. Does anyone know why the holy fire descends in Jerusalem on Easter? What does Jesus or Yahweh have to do with it? Nothing at all. At all. But it is a symbol of Prometheus and one of his main feats, the gift of fire to people. And if this is a reminder of his gift, then it looks very logical. Moreover, Prometheus has a wonderful motive for so strongly striving to establish communication with the Egyptian underground enclave. It's very simple. His brother Atlas is still there, and he's holding the dome there. He needs saving. You're on the Mysteries of History channel.